Welcome to Law, Life, and Liberty with Anthony Puopolo.
Welcome to Law, Life, and Liberty with Anthony Puopolo. Anthony G. Puopolo II is a Massachusetts attorney who helps families navigate divorce, custody disputes, and criminal charges that often overlap. With offices in Lowell and North Andover, he represents clients across Middlesex, Essex, and Suffolk counties in both family and criminal courts. I'm Lisa Mosby, your host, and today we're talking about your rights during a police stop in Massachusetts. Welcome, Tony. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me back.
You know, Tony, what is the single most common misconception Massachusetts residents have about their rights when they see blue lights in the rearview mirror?
I would say probably that they have to answer questions. People feel like they have to tell the police whatever the police ask, rather than simply just saying, I'm declining to answer any questions. They do have a right to remain silent.
And that's a hard one for me. I didn't know that until I started interviewing attorneys and finding out all of this information about what our rights truly are. I'm curious, what specific documents is a driver legally required to provide? And can you refuse to answer questions about everything? Or are there some you need to answer?
So you are required to provide a valid driver's license, a proof of registration, and insurance if requested. Typically, most police officers will just ask for your driver's license and registration. You do have to answer the question about who you are. You can't lie to the police about your identity. But in general, things like, what were you doing today? Where are you coming from? You can refuse to answer questions like that.
Wow. Massachusetts is often described as having stronger privacy protections than the U.S. Constitution provides. Can you explain the unique power of Article 14?
So Article 14 is a corollary to the United States Constitution Fourth Amendment, which guarantees against illegal searches and seizures. Article 14 actually is more restrictive on law enforcement in that under the federal guidelines, if a law enforcement has a good faith reason to believe that they're acting lawfully, then evidence can still come in. Massachusetts does not recognize the good faith exception. We require strict adherence to proper search and seizures.
And then how has the atmosphere of standard traffic stops changed for both officers and citizens in the last few years, given the recent police reform laws?
So Massachusetts passed police reform laws in 2020, and I would say that there has been much more of a shift in traffic stops to a much more formal safety-based concern of a stop, making sure that there's more often use of body camera footage. So I would say the concerns for the protection of both officers and the temporarily stopped person have been increased over the past few years.
And I'm curious, there was a time when you always got out of the car to meet the officer, or perhaps they invited you to sit in the front seat of the police officer's car. Is that still the case, or do we shy away from all of that? And you stay in your car, the officer will stand outside unless they require you to move out or come out of the car?
Typically, unless the officer orders you out of the vehicle, people remain in the car. In fact, that's a much more of a safety concern. Many officers will tell you if you attempt to try to get out of the vehicle, to stay in the vehicle until you're told to exit.
And then if they ask you to get in their car, can you decline, or is it required?
If they ask you to get in their vehicle, I think it's at that point you need to ask if you're free to leave, because that's starting to feel more like you're in custody. And at that point, you should ask if you're free to leave. If the answer is no, at that moment, don't answer any further questions. If the answer is yes, then you should calmly get in your vehicle and peacefully drive away.
Thank you for that. And then, Tony, from your experience, let's shift to the courtroom. In the courtroom, what is the number one mistake that people make during a police stop that inadvertently hurts their legal defense later?
Talking. I would say talking is the number one mistake. Everybody wants to explain their side. They think if the police officer just understands their position, that they're going to be free to leave. And all the people are doing is really giving more information for their eventual prosecution.
And then how does reasonable suspicion differ from probable cause in Massachusetts? And why should a driver care which one the officer has?
So, as far as the driver's concern about which one the officer has, that's not something you should be worried about because those are legal arguments. Reasonable suspicion is it's more than a hunch, but not enough to rise to a level where there has to have a probability that a crime has occurred. They have to essentially have articulable facts that lead them to believe that some criminal activity may be going on. That's reasonable suspicion. When you get to probable cause, they need to have more of a standard to say, yes, a reasonable person looking at these facts would have reason to believe that a crime has occurred or is ongoing.
So, Anthony, if an officer asks, do you mind if I take a quick look in your trunk? What is the most legally sound way to respond?
You should say, I do not consent to any searches. Realistically, at that point, they may try to threaten you and say, well, if you don't let me search your vehicle, I'm going to have to arrest you. And at that point, it's time to call their bluff. Either they're going to arrest you, either they already have enough in their mind that they think they can arrest you, in which point allowing them to search your vehicle just gives them more, or they're going to have to let you go. Either way, you are now in a land where you need to let the criminal defense attorney have the best possible evidence to potentially suppress an illegal search. So you should absolutely say no, even if it ultimately will lead to your arrest, because if they're going to arrest you, they've already made the decision that they're going to.
That makes sense. And Anthony, what are the rules about plain view? We've all heard the term. If an officer sees something legal, like a licensed firearm, does that automatically allow a full car search?
It doesn't automatically allow a full car search. Plain view doctrine allows evidence that in Massachusetts, an officer inadvertently discovers to come in as a warrantless search. So I'll give you an example. I have a client who had a firearm in her purse. Her purse was in between her legs on the passenger floor. She was asked to exit the vehicle. She exited the vehicle. The purse tipped over, the gun fell out. It was an error. It was an inadvertent discovery, but the fact that she had a gun in her purse, which otherwise might have required a search warrant, that evidence comes in because it just fell out of her purse. But that in and of itself doesn't necessarily give full license to search the entire vehicle. There would have to be some other extenuating circumstances of what evidence may exist in that car. Is the car going to be towed because the person is arrested? Then they'll have to do an inventory search. There's a lot of complicated factors that you have to consider in a search to determine whether or not it was lawful.
And then if an individual believes that their rights were violated during a stop, what immediate steps should they take to preserve evidence for a future motion to suppress?
Well, at arraignment, you should file a motion to preserve evidence, but that is a very strategic decision that you and your lawyer should have a discussion regarding, because sometimes you don't want to call attention to the evidence. If it's referenced in the police report, the Commonwealth has an obligation to provide it at some point. And if the evidence goes missing, that can actually be helpful to your case. So filing a motion to preserve all but guarantees that issue won't happen. If the evidence isn't referenced in the police report and you believe that it is what we call exculpatory or something that will help you, then you should absolutely file a motion to preserve, because the judge will generally routinely allow that motion. And then if the evidence goes missing, you have a very strong argument for suppression.
Tony, where I want to wrap this episode up is, can you actually walk us through an incident where somebody is pulled over? What is our optimal behavior as the driver of the vehicle?
Optimal behavior is to be calm, polite, answer the required questions. The thing, like I said, you have to tell them who you are. You have to provide them your license and registration. But that should be the extent of it. Don't answer questions. Just say, I invoke my right to remain silent. And you can always ask, am I free to leave? And if the answer is yes, then you should leave. If the answer is no, then you should remain silent.
I think that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well. That's it for today's episode of Law, Life, and Liberty with Anthony Puopolo. To learn more about Anthony and his work across Massachusetts with family and criminal courts, visit agplawoffices.com. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review so more Massachusetts families can find the guidance they need. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.